The night was born out of chaos. The ocean, vast and merciless, seemed alive, breathing, raging, swallowing everything that dared to challenge it. The rain fell in sharp slants, slicing through the dark, while thunder rolled like the voice of an ancient god. Somewhere out there, beyond the black horizon, a yacht fought for its life. Its lights flickered wildly, then disappeared into the storm. For a moment, it was as if the sea had claimed another secret, another soul. Beneath that roaring sky, a man clung to the remnants of his Fortuna broken-deck plank, his only lifeline. His name was Te Obasanjo, one of Africa's wealthiest men, a name that once echoed in boardrooms and skyscrapers, now drowned in the whispers of the sea. His mind blurred between memories and madness. He thought of glass towers, of parties in Lagos, of faces he couldn't remember, and of one face he never saw again. The current dragged him closer to shore, where an old fishing village slept under the storm's wrath. Most homes were just wooden shacks held together by faith and rope. Inside one of them, 3 children stirred as the wind tore at their thatched roof. Triplets born minutes apart, but bonded like one soul. Kofi, the eldest by heart, heard it first, the faint crash of something heavy against the rocks. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. His sisters, Ama and Abina, exchanged frightened glances. Lightning flashed, and in that split second, they saw something in the water. Without hesitation, Kofi grabbed a lantern and ran out. The rain slapped his face, the wind almost knocking him down. Behind him, the girls followed, their small feet sinking into the wet sand. The ocean roared louder, as if warning them to turn back. But they didn't. They reached the shoreline just in time to see a lifeless man, half buried in sea foam, his body twisted by the tide. Amma gasped. "He's still breathing," she cried, kneeling beside him. The man's lips were pale, his pulse faint, but their heart beat. Abina tore off her scarf and wrapped it around his head to stop the bleeding. They had no medical training, no help coming, just instinct and courage. Kofi looked around, shouting into the wind, "Help, someone help," but the storm swallowed his voice whole. Together, they dragged the man away from the rising waves, inch by inch, their small hands trembling but determined. His clothes were torn, soaked in salt and blood. He was far from the world. They knew his watch alone was worth more than their entire village, yet, to them, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just a human being, dying in front of their eyes. Hours passed before the storm began to ease. The village elder arrived, drawn by their cries. "What madness is this?" he shouted, kneeling beside the stranger. His weathered eyes scanned the man's face, then widened. "I've seen him before, in the newspapers." He turned to the children. "You 3, what have you brought ashore?" The triplets exchanged nervous looks. Kofi swallowed hard. "We just saved him, Papa. He was drowning." The old man nodded slowly, but his gaze lingered on the stranger's expensive ring, a symbol of power few ever saw up close. He sighed. "Then may the ancestors guide your hands, for fate does not bring men like this here without reason." That night, the storm moved inland, but something else lingered, an unease, a silent presence in the air. Inside their small hut, the triplets laid the man near the fire. His breathing steadied, shallow but alive. Amma dabbed his forehead with a wet cloth, whispering prayers under her breath. "He looks broken," Abina murmured. "Maybe he lost everything." Kofi didn't reply. He just stared at the man's face, feeling something strange, a connection he couldn't explain. Outside, the waves crashed against the shore, carrying away pieces of the shattered yacht. The ocean had given them a man, but taken something in return. No one knew what story had begun that night, only that destiny had quietly shifted its course. As dawn broke, golden light spilled over the sea, revealing the wreck in full splintered wood, scattered glass, and a name barely visible on the hull. The Amara. The villagers gathered, whispering stories of omens and curses. Some said the man was blessed to survive, others said he should have drowned. But for the triplets, it wasn't about luck or fear, it was about the moment they chose to act when the world turned away. By midday, he stirred for the first time, his voice hoarse, whispering something no one understood. Emma leaned closer, catching just one word before he faded again. Amara. The name echoed in her mind like a ghost. She didn't know it yet, but that single word was the key to everything: the past, the pain, and the truth that would one day tear their world apart. The morning after the storm smelled of salt, smoke, and something heavier, secrets rising from the sea. The village came alive with whispers before the sun had even burned away the fog. Women stood near their doorsteps, murmuring prayers. Men dragged the remains of the wreck from the shore, their faces hardened with both curiosity and caution. The triplets stood near the edge of the water, staring at the broken pieces of the yacht as they glimmered faintly under the dawn light. "It's like a ghost ship," Ama whispered. Kofi said nothing, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sea still rolled in restless waves. Inside the small hut, the stranger Taze leapt restlessly. His breath came in uneven bursts, his brow lined with fever. Abina sat beside him, dipping a cloth in cool water, pressing it gently against his forehead. She watched his lips move, whispering words she couldn't understand. He spoke of names: Amara, Femi, forgive me, like confessions torn from dreams. Each word carried a weight none of them could yet comprehend. By midday, the elder returned with 2 men from the town clinic. They examined the stranger, murmuring to each other in low voices. "He's lucky," one said, shaking his head. "The sea should have taken him." The elder nodded, his tone low but firm. "The sea brings what it must, but we must decide what to do with him now." The question lingered in the room like smoke. No one wanted to send him away, yet no one wanted the burden of keeping him either. Kofi finally stepped forward. "He can stay with us until he's better," he said quietly. Ama and Abina looked at him, startled. "We barely have food for ourselves," Abina protested, but her voice softened as she looked at the man. "Still, he needs help." The elder gave a long, thoughtful sigh. "Very well, but be careful, children. When fate drops a stranger at your feet, it is never without a price." That night the wind was calm, but the village couldn't sleep. Rumors spread like dry grass. Some said he was a criminal fleeing justice. Others claimed he was cursed, a spirit from the storm disguised as a man. Kofi ignored them all, tending to the fire, watching the stranger's chest rise and fall. He couldn't explain why he felt so protective, as though this man's life mattered more than he understood. Alma found an old coat to cover the man's shoulders. She noticed his hands calloused, but the kind that had never worked in fields or fished in rivers. A powerful man's hands, shaped by deals and decisions, not by nets and rope. "He's different," she murmured. Abina nodded. "Maybe that's why the sea brought him here. Maybe he needs to learn what it's like to be ordinary." The thought lingered between them, innocent yet prophetic. Days turned into weeks. Tay's strength slowly returned, though his memories came and went like flickering light. Sometimes he spoke of cities and skyscrapers, of boardrooms filled with men who feared him. Other times, he whispered in confusion, calling out names no one knew. When he finally stood for the first time, his gaze fell upon the triplets with a strange intensity. "You saved me," he said softly. "Why?" Kofi simply replied, "Because no one else would." Their connection grew in silence. He watched them work mending nets, fetching water, helping their mother in the small garden behind the hut. The simplicity of their life both humbled and unsettled him. He wasn't used to kindness without reason, 2 hands that gave without asking. Every gesture from them became a quiet mirror, reflecting the emptiness he had carried for years. But as his health improved, so did the whispers. The villagers began to ask questions. "Why hasn't he left?" One man muttered near the market. "What if he brings trouble?" said another. Even the elder grew wary. "Teo Basanjo," he repeated one morning after finding an ID card in the man's torn jacket. "The man who owns half of Lagos. What business does he have here?" The realization struck the village like lightning. The stranger wasn't just a man, he was power itself. Stranded in their midst that evening, Tay sat outside, watching the children play near the shore. For the first time in years, he smiled, a small, honest smile. But inside, a storm brewed just as fierce as the one that had wrecked his ship. He knew the world would come looking for him soon. Wealth never vanished quietly. And yet, a strange reluctance held him back. Leaving meant returning to the life he had built on lies. Staying meant facing truths he wasn't ready to confront. Late that night, Amma woke to a faint light outside. She stepped out and saw him standing by the water, staring into the dark sea. "You should rest," she said softly. He turned to her, his voice low. "The ocean doesn't sleep, child. It takes and gives as it pleases. Sometimes I wonder which I deserve." She didn't understand the depth of his words, not yet, but she felt the sadness behind them, the kind only carried by men who had lost something they could never replace. The next morning, a black car appeared on the dirt road, a rare sight in their village. Men in suits stepped out, their polished shoes sinking into the mud. They asked for Te Oba. The news spread faster than fire. The children watched as he stood, trembling slightly, his eyes lost somewhere between gratitude and fear. For the first time since the storm, he looked truly alive, but also truly haunted. He turned to Kofi, Ama and Abina, and said quietly, "Whatever happens after this, remember sometimes the people who save you are the ones you were meant to find." None of them understood what he meant then, but fate had already drawn its lines, and soon, the truth would come for them all. The men in black waited outside the hut, their umbrellas gleaming with rainwater, their eyes cold and trained. The villagers watched from a distance, whispering behind woven baskets. It was as if a different world had intruded upon their steel and glass, invading mud and palm. Tay stood silently near the doorway, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he didn't move. His body was there, but his soul seemed still trapped somewhere out at sea. One of the men stepped forward, his voice sharp and respectful. "Sir, we've been searching for you for weeks. The Coast Guard declared you missing." He paused, studying Tay's ragged clothes, his unshaven face. "We need to get you back to the city immediately. The board, your family, everyone's waiting." Tay looked past him, his eyes landing on the triplets. Ama's face was half hidden behind the doorframe. Abina clutched a small basket in her hands, and Kofi stood with his arms crossed, eyes wary. They didn't understand what was happening, but they knew one thing: their quiet world was about to change. He nodded slowly. "Give me a moment," he said. His voice carried weight, the kind that silenced everyone around. He stepped closer to the children. "I owe you my life," he began softly. "You gave me something money could never buy, a reason to live again." His gaze softened. "But there are things I must face before I can understand why fate brought me here." Kofi frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. Tay reached into his coat and pulled out a gold pencil, elegant, engraved with his initials. "Keep this, as proof that even in the darkest sea, light finds its way." He placed it in Kofi's palm, then turned toward the men waiting by the car. As the engine roared to life, and the car disappeared down the dirt road, the triplets stood in silence, watching until the dust settled. For the first time, their small hut felt emptier, the air too still. Ama looked at the pen in Kofi's hand and whispered, "He'll come back." Kofi wanted to believe that. Abina, always the quiet one, just stared at the horizon, as though trying to see beyond it. In the city, the return of Tay Obasanjo made headlines overnight. Billionaire found alive after tragic shipwreck. The world rejoiced, investors cheered, television anchors smiled. But beneath the surface, Tay felt like an intruder in his own life. The marble floors of his mansion echoed hollowly, the faces of his employees greeted him with rehearsed relief. He had survived, yes, but something inside him hadn't made it back. He sat in his vast office, overlooking the skyline, the hum of the city below like distant waves. His assistant, Miriam, stood by his side, handing him reports and schedules. "You've missed 3 board meetings, sir. The investors are demanding answers about the cargo ship and the funds." He raised his hand, silencing her. "Not now." His eyes drifted to the window. The sea shimmered faintly in the distance, mocking him with memories. He could still see the children's faces, the honesty in their eyes, something no business deal had ever given him. That night, he dreamed of the storm again, but this time, the sea wasn't angry. It whispered. Voices called his name from the depths, merging with laughter, children's laughter. He woke up sweating, his heart pounding. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt drawn back to that place, that village, those 3 faces. Yet, in his waking life, he buried the thought beneath layers of meetings and phone calls, pretending he had moved on. Weeks passed, and the triplets continued their daily life. The sea had returned to calm, but the story of the rescued man became legend. Villagers spoke of them as the chosen ones, the children who saved a man of power. Ama would sometimes sit by the shore, tracing circles in the sand. "Do you think he remembers us?" she asked one evening. Kofi nodded, though his voice lacked conviction. "People like him, they don't forget, they just take time to come back." But deep down, he wasn't sure. The world of money and cities felt too far away from theirs, too unreachable. Abina, ever the dreamer, said softly, "Maybe the ocean brought him here for a reason. Maybe it wasn't the end of something, it was the start." Her words lingered, floating like the sound of distant waves. In Lagos, the weight of his old life began to press down again. Business partners demanded his attention. Charity events filled his evenings. Cameras followed his every move. But even amid the glamour, his mind wandered to the sound of rain on a tin roof, to the laughter of 3 children who had treated him like a man, not a name. The contrast was unbearable. One evening, during a corporate gala, he excused himself and walked outside to the terrace. The city lights stretched endlessly, but he saw none of it. Instead, his mind drifted back to that shoreline, to the faint glow of a lantern in the storm. Why them? He whispered to himself. Why those three? He couldn't shake the feeling that something greater bound them, something beyond coincidence. The following morning, his private investigator entered his office with a thick file. Sir, he said carefully, we ran a background check on the village. The children Kofiyama and Aben are orphans. Their mother died giving birth. Their father was never known. Tay froze, his heartbeat slowing. Never known. He repeated, yes sir. Locals say she worked briefly in the city years ago. Then she returned, pregnant with triplets. The investigator paused. She mentioned a man named Tay. Silence, a crushing, suffocating silence filled the room. Tay's hands trembled as he took the file. Inside was an old photograph, faded, sun-stained, of a young woman standing near a market stall. He recognized her instantly. Her name was Amina, the woman he had loved long ago, before the empire, before the power, the woman he had abandoned when his world demanded more than his heart could give. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. The truth settled in, slowly, painfully. The sea hadn't just brought him survivors, it had brought him home. The rain began to fall again that night in Lagasoft, hesitant, almost mournful. Tay sat alone in his vast living room, the flicker of the fireplace reflecting against his tired eyes. The files still lay open before him, that photograph staring back like a ghost he'd tried to forget. The woman in the picture, Mina, had a smile that used to calm storms inside him. Her eyes carried warmth, strength, and forgiveness. But now, they only brought pain. He reached out, tracing the edges of her face with trembling fingers, as though trying to touch a memory long lost to time. The past began to unspool in his mind like an old film reel. He saw himself years ago, young and ambitious, with eyes set on the skyline. He had come from nothing, a boy with dreams bigger than his city. Then he met Amina. She worked at a small coastal cafe, where the air always smelled of coffee and salt. She was kind to everyone, but to him, she gave something different: belief. When he spoke of building an empire, she listened as if it was already real. When he failed, she smiled and said, even the sea pulls back before it moves forward. He had never forgotten those words, but success came like a storm, sudden, violent, and greedy. Business deals multiplied, partners demanded more, and love became something that slowed him down. He remembered the night it ended. Amina had stood at the doorway of that same cafe, rain dripping from her scarf. You're changing, Tay, she said softly. You're chasing ghosts in glass towers. He didn't answer then. He just left, his ambition louder than her voice. He thought he would come back one day. He thought there would be time, but time has a way of teaching lessons when you least expect it. Months turned into years. He built everything he thought he wanted, but something inside him remained, hollow like a room with no sound. And now, sitting in that mansion, surrounded by luxury, he realized what the emptiness had always been. It wasn't failure. It was absence. The absence of her, and of what she carried with her. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. His mind raced with questions that had no answers. Could the triplets truly be his? He remembered Amina's laughter, the curve of her voice, the way she'd looked at him the last time they spoke. It wasn't impossible. The timelines matched. His chest tightened as another realization hit him. They were his children. They had saved him without even knowing who he was. Fate had played a cruel, poetic game. The following morning, he called his driver. We're going back to the coast, he said. The driver hesitated. Sir, it's a long journey. Are you sure? Tay's tone left no room for question. Yes, I have to see something. Someone. The drive was long and silent. The city faded behind him, replaced by open roads and the hum of distant rain. As they approached the village, familiar sounds returned: the cries of gulls, the rhythm of waves, the scent of salt. His heart pounded like it hadn't in years. He asked the driver to stop at the edge of the dirt path and continued on foot. Each step felt heavier, as though the ground itself remembered him. The villagers saw him first, this time dressed in plain clothes, no convoy, no entourage. Whispers followed him again, but quieter now, tinged with awe and uncertainty. The triplets were by the shore, repairing nets. Kofi looked up first, eyes narrowing as recognition set in. You came back, he said simply. Tay nodded. His voice trembled slightly. I had to. Ama's smile broke through the tension. You look different, he chuckled softly. I feel different. For a long moment, they just stood there, no words, only the sound of the sea between them. Finally, he asked, do you remember your mother's name? Abina looked up, puzzled. Amina, she said quietly. She died when we were born. Why? The name hit him like a wave. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to speak. Because I knew her once, a long time ago. The children exchanged confused glances. Kofi stepped forward. You knew our mother. He nodded, his eyes glistening. More than that, he whispered. She was my heart before I lost it. That evening, they sat together by the fire, the triplets listening, as Tay spoke for the first time about the past, about love and ambition, about mistakes and storms that never truly pass. He didn't tell them everything, not yet, but something shifted between them that night, an invisible thread pulling tight. As the flames flickered, Amma noticed the way he looked at them, half with pride, half with pain. You look like someone who found something they lost, she said innocently. He smiled faintly. Maybe I did. When the fire burned low, the elder approached, leaning on his cane. You've returned, he said gravely. The sea brings back what it wants, but it never does so without reason. Tay nodded. I know, and I intend to find that reason later. Alone by the water, he looked out at the horizon. The moonlight shimmered on the waves, just as it had the night he nearly died. Only now did he understand it wasn't just survival, it was a second chance. A chance to mend what he broke, to reclaim what time had stolen. He whispered into the wind, Ami, if you can hear me, I'll make it right. I promise. Behind him, unseen, the triplets stood watching, the firelight flickering against their faces. None of them spoke, but in that silence, destiny held its breath. The next morning, the sun rose over the sea, warm and golden. For the first time in decades, Tay Obasanjo felt peace, yet deep down, he knew peace would not come easy. The truth was out there, buried beneath years of pride, pain, and secrets yet to surface, and the ocean, eternal and knowing, was not done with him yet. The air was heavy that morning, thick with salt and silence. The triplets moved quietly around the hut, their minds restless since Tay's return. Something about him had changed the rhythm of their small world. He wasn't just the man they had saved anymore. He was a mystery, a thread that somehow tied into their mother's name, their past, and perhaps even their future. Abina watched him from the doorway as he stood near the shore, hands behind his back, staring at the horizon like it was an old friend he'd wronged. He had been in the village for 3 days now. The people had grown used to seeing him walk barefoot through the sand, greeting fishermen, sharing meals with the children. Yet beneath his calm exterior, a quiet storm brewed. He had come not just to thank them, but to face the truth that had haunted him for years. Somewhere within this humble place lay the final piece of his past, the secret Amina had taken to her grave. That evening, he visited the elder once again. The old man sat beneath a mango tree, the sea breeze brushing through his gray beard. You seek the truth, the elder said before Tay could speak. His eyes, sharp yet kind, seemed to read the thoughts straight from Tay's heart. But truth is like the ocean, it hides more than it shows. Tay nodded. Tell me about Amina, he said softly. The elder sighed deeply. A good woman. She came here many years ago, pregnant and alone. She never spoke of the father, only that he was lost to her because of ambition. She worked hard, lived quietly, and gave birth on a stormy night, just like the one that brought you back. Tay's voice wavered. Did she ever mention me? The elder looked at him for a long moment before answering. Once, when she fell ill, she said your name in her sleep again and again, but she told no one your story, only that the sea would bring you back when the time was right. The words hit him like thunder. The sea would bring you back. He turned his gaze toward the shore, where the waves lapped softly at the sand. It was as if Amina herself had whispered it through the wind all along. Later that night, Amma and Abina sat by the fire, whispering. He said he knew our mother. Amma murmured. What if he's telling the truth? Abina frowned. Then why didn't he come for us? Why did she die alone? Their voices trembled, not from anger, but from confusion. Kofi sat apart, staring into the flames. Maybe he didn't know, he said quietly. Not all fathers leave because they want to. Tay overheard them from outside. Their words pierced deeper than he expected. He walked away into the dark, toward the graveyard behind the villagia, small patch of earth surrounded by palm trees and silence. He found the stone easily. Her name was still there, faintly carved. Amina Oladipo. He knelt down, his voice barely above a whisper. I came back, Amina, but too late, as always. The night offered no answer, only the rhythmic pulse of waves beyond the trees. As he sat there, he remembered the last letter she had sent him, a letter he never opened. It had arrived the same week he closed his first $1 million deal, and he'd tossed it aside in arrogance, thinking he had time. He returned home to find it untouched, yellowed by years. That memory burned now like fire in his chest. "I was blind," he whispered, tears tracing down his face. "Blind and selfish." The next day Ama entered the hut carrying something wrapped in cloth. "This was Mama's," she said. "We never understood what it meant." He handed it to him. Inside was a small wooden box, weathered by time. His fingers shook as he opened it. Inside lay 3 things: a silver necklace shaped like a wave, a faded photograph of him and Amina standing by the sea, and a sealed letter. He stared at it for a long moment, afraid to touch it as though opening it might shatter what little strength he had left. Finally, he broke the seal. The paper was fragile, the handwriting familiar. "Take. If you are reading this, it means fate has finally done what pride could not. I forgive you. I forgave you the moment you left, because love does not stop when one heart walks away. I named them after the Sikofi Ama and Abenabi because the ocean took you, and I believed one day it would bring you back. Do not search for redemption in riches. Find it in them. They are everything I could not give you, and everything you could have been. Amina." The words blurred as tears fell onto the page. For a long time, he said nothing. The triplets watched him silently, unsure whether to comfort him or to keep their distance. Finally, he folded the letter and looked up. "Your mother was the strongest person I ever knew," he said, his voice breaking, "and I was the weakest man she ever loved." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with grief, forgiveness, and something new: understanding. Kofi stood first, stepping closer. "Then don't be that man anymore," he said quietly. "If she believed the sea would bring you back, maybe it's because she knew you still had a chance." Tay looked at them, their faces glowing in the firelight. So much of Amina reflected in their eyes, and for the first time, he felt something he hadn't in years: belonging. He reached out, placing his hand on Kofi's shoulder, then Ama's, then Abina's. "I don't deserve you," he said, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." That night, the sea was calm, almost gentle. The waves whispered softly against the shore, carrying away years of guilt and returning fragments of peace. In the faint glow of the moon, 4 figures stood together: 1 broken man, and 3 children of the storm, united not by blood alone, but by forgiveness born from loss. Yet, as the wind changed direction, the elder's words echoed once more in Tay's mind: "The sea gives what it must, but it always takes something in return." He didn't yet know what that meant, but fate, as it always did, was already moving toward its next tide. The days that followed felt softer, slower, like time itself had begun to heal alongside them. The sea, once violent and wild, now shimmered calm and blue under the rising sun. Tay stayed in the village longer than anyone expected. He helped the fishermen untangle their nets, shared laughter with the children, and even joined the women in repairing broken canoes. For the first time in decades, he felt like a man, not a name of father, not a figure of power. The triplets watched him with a mix of awe and uncertainty, as if trying to decide whether he was truly theirs, or just another dream the ocean might wash away. Every evening, they would gather near the shore. Ama told stories. Their mother used to share folk tales of rivers that could speak, and spirits that guarded lost souls. Tay would listen quietly, smiling faintly, his gaze often lost in the waves. "Your mother always believed the sea was alive," he said one night, his tone both tender and haunted. "She said it remembers everything." Abina looked up, her eyes wide with wonder. "Do you think it remembers us too?" He hesitated, then whispered, "It remembers everything it loves." But peace, as it often does, began to draw unwanted attention. Word of Tay's presence spread beyond the village. Visitors came under the guise of curiosity: journalists, businessmen, and men with questions that smelled like danger. The villagers grew uneasy. Why would a billionaire live among fishermen? They whispered, "What is he hiding?" Even the elders' calm eyes began to show concern. One afternoon, while the triplets were playing near the market, 2 strangers approached them. They wore crisp shirts, city watches, gleaming under the sun. "You're the children who saved him, aren't you?" one asked, with a too kind smile. Kofi stepped in front of his sisters instinctively. "Who's asking?" the man chuckled, pulling out a card. "We work for Mr. Obasanjo's company. We just want to talk." But something in their tone didn't feel like gratitude. It felt like measurement, as if they were assessing value, not kindness. When Tay found out, his expression hardened. "You stay away from my family," he told the men, his voice low, firm, and edged with fury. They left quickly, but not before one of them muttered, Careful, sir. The truth always surfaces. That night, Tay sat alone, staring at the necklace that once belonged to Amina. He had built empires with lies, but now he feared losing what truth had finally given him. The triplets noticed the change in him. His laughter grew quieter, his eyes heavier. Emma tried to lift his spirit, cooking meals he liked, telling jokes she barely understood herself. Abina brought him seashells she collected every morning, saying each one had a wish inside. But Kofi began to grow suspicious. He had overheard the men in the market talking about missing money, investigations, and an accident that wasn't an accident. One evening, as the sky bruised purple and gold, Kofi confronted him. "What really happened that night?" he asked. "On your ship." The question froze the air between them. Tay looked at him, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "It was a storm," he began, but Kofi cut him off. "No, I've heard the stories. They say someone tried to sink it, that it wasn't an accident." For a long time, Tay said nothing. Then he exhaled slowly. "You're right," he admitted. "It wasn't." His voice dropped, the calm tone of a man who'd carried too many ghosts. The ship wasn't just carrying cargo, it was carrying secrets, documents that could have destroyed powerful men, and one of them wanted me gone. The children exchanged startled looks. Ama whispered, "Then why come back here?" He smiled faintly. "Because sometimes the only way to stay alive is to go where the world stops looking." From that night on, the mood in the village shifted. The laughter that once filled the air became whispers again. Shadows followed him when he walked through the market. Even the fishermen began avoiding eye contact, as though fearing the danger he brought with him. Still, the triplets stayed close, drawn by something deeper than Fearblood's quiet pull. One evening, a storm began to build on the horizon, dark clouds curling over the water like the memory of that night. Tay stood by the shore, the wind tugging at his shirt, his thoughts as heavy as the sky. Abina came to his side, holding the silver necklace in her small hand. "You keep staring at the ocean," she said softly. "What do you see?" He smiled weakly. "My mistakes, and the people I've lost." She looked up at him with childlike honesty. "Then maybe it's time to stop looking back." The word struck something in him. He realized he had been living between guilt and gratitude, unable to move forward. The storm rolled closer, lightning flickering like flashes of memory. He turned to her, his voice low but steady. "You sound just like your mother." The rain began to fall before he could say more. The triplets ran for shelter, but he remained standing, letting the water wash over him, as if it could cleanse everything. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine roared familiar, out of place. When it stopped, men stepped out. The same ones from before. Only this time, they weren't here to ask questions. By the time the triplets noticed, Tay was gone from the beach. Only his footprints remained, half erased by the tide. Kofi's stomach dropped. "Something's wrong," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. They searched until nightfall, the storm raging around them. When they finally found his watch on the sand, cracked and still ticking, Ama fell to her knees. The ocean roared louder than ever, as if mocking them or warning them that its debts had come due. The storm that night was different, angrier, colder, as though the ocean itself had remembered an old grudge. Lightning tore through the sky, revealing flashes of figures moving near the shore. The triplets ran through the rain, their clothes soaked, calling out his name between thunderclaps. Tay, Kofi's voice cracked through the storm. There was no reply, only the crashing of waves and the distant hum of an engine disappearing into the dark. When morning came, the sea was quiet again, too quiet. The villagers gathered along the coastline, staring at the horizon where the sky met the water in a gray blur. Pieces of wood and fabric floated near the rocks, a sign of struggle, not accident. The elder stood beside the triplets, his face grim. "The sea has taken him once more," he murmured. But Kofi shook his head, his jaw clenched. "No, it didn't take him. Someone did." They found tire marks on the dirt road leading out of the village, fresh, deep, and rushed. Whoever had come that night hadn't come for peace. Ama knelt beside the prince, her hands trembling. He said people wanted him gone. Maybe they found him. The realization hung between them like smoke. Abina clutched her necklace, the one their mother had left. "Then we have to find him," she whispered, "before the sea buries the truth." Days passed with no word. The city papers ran stories again. Billionaire missing, foul play suspected. Reporters flooded the area, turning their quiet village into chaos. Kofi avoided them all, driven by something stronger than fear. He went through everything Tay had left behind his bag, his notes, even the broken watch they found in the sand. Inside its backplate, he discovered something folded paper, sealed tightly, as if hidden on purpose. It was a list of names, powerful names, ministers, businessmen, men who ruled from the shadows. Next to each name, a symbol, an anchor. Amma's voice trembled as she read them. This is what he meant, she said. The ship wasn't just a storm. It was a message. Abina looked at the paper again. What kind of message? Kofi's voice was low, steady, the kind people kill to silence. Meanwhile, miles away in Lagos, behind tinted glass and guarded gates, a man named Chief Adewale poured himself a drink. He was one of those names on the list, a man whose smile could ruin empires. His assistant entered, hesitant. Sir, they still haven't found him. The chief's hand froze mid-air. They will, he said coldly, or they'll find what's left of him. He turned to the window, watching the city lights flicker. He should have stayed lost. The sea gave him a second chance, and he wasted it. Back in the village, Kofi had made up his mind. We're going to Lagos, he declared. If we stay here, they'll come again. Ama looked terrified. We don't even know where to start. He handed her the list. We start with this. Abina hesitated, glancing toward the ocean. Mama always said the sea protects those who walk with truth. Maybe it'll protect us now. Kofi nodded, though his heart was pounding. He wasn't sure if he believed in protection anymore, only in survival. Their journey began at dawn. The road was long and uncertain, stretching from the salt-stained coast to the metallic skyline of the city. Along the way, they saw two worlds colliding: fishermen hauling nets beside oil refineries, children playing near billboards of men like Tay. The closer they got to Lagos, the more they realized how wide the gap between their lives and his truly was. When they arrived, the city swallowed them whole. Noise, traffic, lights, and people who didn't look twice. They found an old friend of Tay's, a retired journalist named Chika, who had once covered his rise to power. He lived in a cluttered apartment filled with old newspapers and secrets. When Kofi showed him the list, the man went pale. Where did you get this? He demanded. From him, Kofi replied. Before he disappeared, Chika rubbed his temples. These men, they control everything: contracts, oil, politics, even the police. If Tay tried to expose them, they wouldn't rest until he vanished. He looked at the children with pity. If you value your lives, go home. Forget all this. But Ama shook her head. He's our father. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The old man's eyes softened. Then I suppose there's no turning back. That night, as the city lights flickered outside their small motel room, the triplets couldn't sleep. Each of them thought of him, of the man who had come from the sea and changed everything. Abina lay awake, clutching her necklace. What if he's already gone? She whispered. Ama turned to her. Then we'll find who did it, and make them pay. Outside, Kofi sat by the window, staring at the skyline. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Tay's gold pen, the one he had given him on that first day. Turning it in his hand, he noticed something he hadn't before. The pen unscrewed at the middle. Inside, hidden within the barrel, was a tiny flash drive. He froze, his breath quickened. Could this be what they were all after? He didn't tell his sisters right away. Not yet. He needed to be sure. The next morning, he met Chika again, handing him the drive. Together, they plugged it into an old laptop. Files appeared, dozens of them. Documents, bank records, evidence of bribes, offshore accounts, and names that reached the highest seats of power. One file was labeled Amara, the name of the ship. Kofi clicked it open. Inside were messages, emails between Tay and someone named Chief Adewale, threats, betrayal, a plan to silence him permanently. Chika leaned back, his face pale. This could destroy them all. But before they could react, the door burst open. Two men in black stepped inside, guns drawn. Step away from the computer, one barked. Kofi's heart stopped. Chika stood quickly, trying to shield them. They're just kids, he shouted. A shot rang out. Chaos erupted. The children screamed as Chika fell, blood spreading across the floor. Kofi grabbed the laptop and ran, Ama pulling Abina behind him. They crashed through the back door into the alley, the rain pouring hard again, lightning flashing across the wet streets. Footsteps followed. Tires screeched. A van door slammed open. They ran until their lungs burned, until the sound of pursuit faded behind them. Finally, in a narrow alley lit only by a flickering street lamp, they stopped. Kofi clutched the laptop to his chest, shaking. Ama sobbed quietly, her face streaked with rain and tears. Abina looked up at the sky, whispering through trembling lips, Mama, protect us. Somewhere far beyond the city, Waves crashed against the shore, and deep beneath those waves, something stirred, something that wasn't finished. To be continued.